Okay, so this is part two of ADD, ADHD, and me sharing my experience with this phenomena and my healing process and my understanding. So that, I guess ADD, I would say, in addition to depression and anxiety, was probably the biggest struggles I've had that brought me to this healing work. And in part one, I say that actually the problem started originally the day I was born, because I came from a place of complete oneness and unity and acceptance and being taken care of into a world that's very different. And so that's when the struggle began. That's when some of the imprints of the beliefs were there, and sometimes later on during childhood. And how this is goes beyond just ADD and ADHD into what it is to be human and to navigate being on this planet. And I know, like growing up, I used to think, okay, so is this what it's about? Like you go to school, you then get a job or career, you get married, have kids, and then you like eventually retire and then you die. And is that it? There's got to be more than that. And where you are geographically, your culture, your family's ideals and religion may give you a different sort of picture for what you should live or what it should look like. But nevertheless, a lot of us have felt like there's something wrong with this. And it's not that, like, it's an illusion, actually, but it's not that in it is the illusion. It's the fact that that's it. That's the purpose of your life, and there's nothing more. That's the illusion. And that's why so many of us don't feel right growing up. We don't feel good. We don't feel like we fit in. And then we think we're the only ones when so many other people felt the same way. Uh, and one thing I had to work on is that so many habits of like repressing some aspect of myself. And that was that sense of something's not right here. And I've got questions. And I never gave that voice as a child. I never asked the teacher, well, why do we need to learn this? Like sincerely, not as like just a reaction, but it's like, I really want to understand why. Like, why is this? If I would have voiced those questions, I probably wouldn't have suffered so much. Um, and also, I discuss someone asked, well, what does it feel like to have ADD? So I discussed some of the things I struggled with. A scattered mind is one that a lot of people struggle with. Uh, some of us are susceptible to that, and some of us are not. And that was a huge issue, and it happened on a very severe level for me, which is why I took medication in order to function for like 15 years. How I got off the medication and how that started to ease up for me was when I, I started accessing and feeling and releasing all those repressed emotions that I was carrying. Um, so when we're pushing down what we feel, we're pushing down, I talked about the questions, push that down. I pushed my connection to the multidimensional reality down. It doesn't fit into the world that I think I'm supposed to sort of participate in. We push all these things down. Of course, if we're susceptible to a scattered mind, that will show up. We won't feel clear. We won't feel like there's no center inside. So my mind gets really scattered if I'm repressing any aspect of myself, but it was especially relevant when I was younger. So when I started opening up that and feeling things that I had kept disconnected from, and so a lot of these things are like when you're really sensitive and you don't know how to deal with it, because some of the emotions are related to things we pick up in our environment, some of the feelings. And so sometimes a coping mechanism might be to just shut all that sensitivity down. And sometimes insensitive people have once been a very sensitive being and just didn't know how to cope with it. Um, and I know hyperactivity was one issue that I experienced as a child. And some people will allow a child that's hyper and not wanting to sit down, they'll allow the child to go run and play and have that, like really expend that energy. And I think that's such a compassionate way to deal with that in that child. And because I know it's very difficult to be forced to sit still when you don't want to. And that happened a lot to me. And because it was frustrating to the adults and the teacher, like, you got to sit there. And so one of the things I did is if I had to sit still, then I would zone out and I would basically travel. Either I was connecting to something or I was just in my own mind, but I wasn't present. And that was one of the things, is that I didn't want to be here. That was one of the things running in the background of my unconscious. I don't want to be here. It was like resisting everything, resisting being here, resisting school, resisting the people that I would come in contact with. Um, and realizing that actually I was resisting it because I didn't understand how to navigate that. And I also didn't, it was like the disconnect from myself, the repressions, not honoring my own inner experience, which meant overwhelm with all the things that are going on in the world. When we're connected to ourselves and rooted to ourselves, there's a sense of relaxation and joy and connection. Um, when we're trying to fit into something outside and we're not connecting to ourselves at all, we're not honoring our experience, of course we're not going to feel good. We're either going to feel numb, we're going to feel chaos. Everyone has their sort of coping ways. So you might, as you're listening to me, you might actually reflect on what those are for you. And so what happens is people sometimes struggle with the outer manifestations of something, like, oh, I have a scattered mind. My mind just scatters. But exploring why that is, and when that happens and when it doesn't happen so much, is a one good way to explore that. Um, I also mentioned a foggy world. That's how it was for me. The whole world was foggy, and it's related to what I just talked about, is like shutting down the sensitivity. It was like shutting down the, like, I don't even want to know what's going on in the world. I don't want to know. It's like I felt it before. It's painful. I didn't like it. So I'm just going to like keep a little like bubble around me and just shut everything out. So then I was disoriented. I didn't know where I was because I didn't realize that unconsciously I made a decision. I didn't want to be aware of it. I don't want to know. So once I became aware of that decision, I could heal that, heal the reasons for that decision. And then the world stopped, that symptom just went away. The world stopped being foggy. Just like also when people would talk to me and they sounded like they were speaking from underwater, I couldn't hear them. Part of that was a decision that I don't want to hear them. I was struggling with that, yet unconsciously I had decided I don't want to listen to people. Because when you listen to people, you're also tuning in, like you might be hearing, feeling their emotions that they're not really like acknowledging in themselves. You might be aware of the things that they're not saying. There's a lot, right? Um, and so how to navigate that has been a huge part of my process, so that I don't have to block things out. And I can also take more responsibility for myself in making choices. And that goes in, that's sort of comes along with the trust in ourselves, in our own inner world, seeing that these things are meaningful, and how to navigate the challenges of the emotions, of this, of what we're sensing. And um, people who have a tendency to please other people often experience a lot of confusion and chaos, because if you're pleasing other people, then you're 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 using your awareness to pick up on what they want from you so that you can please them. So you're just taking on their ideas, their beliefs, their stories, their emotions, so that you can navigate that. And then you're discounting yourself. That's why that habit can be so destructive, yet it's so common because growing up, again, that's how we survived, or that's how we thought we had to be to survive. Um, Really, it actually hurts us. It doesn't really help us survive, but we think it does. I also want to talk about labels. So ADD is a label, and how we categorize and classify ourselves. Sometimes these labels, they can help us validate something in us. And like, I know when I was doing research early on in my life into these things, and I would read something and I was like, oh my gosh, like someone put words to something that I didn't know, I'd never really acknowledged, that's always been there. So that was helpful. It opened up a certain level of self-awareness in myself and a pathway to discover myself. Um, and also, there's this, like in my mind, I had this logic that said if you get the right diagnosis, then you get the right cure or the remedy, which it doesn't work like that when the diagnosis doesn't really um, give you the truth of who you are. So then there is, it sort of gives you something, but yeah. So when I found out that's not true, uh, about the psychiatric system and about a lot of these like psychology kind of systems. They can help us to a certain extent, but certain ways of classifying things don't feel right. Like neurodivergent, neurotypical, these kind of things where it sort of feels like it separates us in a superficial way, typical, non-typical. It's like getting identified with that doesn't feel like it's helpful. And one thing I've worked through in myself in the past and in my experiences of feeling insecure or feeling small or feeling inferior is that we humans tend to do this is in order to deal with that, we sort of compensate by feeling superior or feeling special, but not a real, it's not the real specialness. It's that superficial specialness that it's like, I'm special and you're not. And so, like, it can be a switching, like the person who feels like an outcast and they weren't good enough flips over to feels like I'm better than other people because I'm so different and you just don't understand, like that kind of thing. It's just flipping. It's wise to work with the fears and the insecurities and the things that make us feel small, because then uh, we don't have to create that artificial superiority when, and then we end up basically continuing the same cycle that was done to us. um, because there were people who conditioned us because they thought they liked that, having that power over us or that artificial authority, and then people compensate and do the same. And so we don't want to continue that kind of cycle, the real healing that breaks us out of both sides of the ego, inferiority, less than, superiority, better than. Okay, so then you don't have to like compensate for something, heal the underlying thing that you feel that you need to compensate for. Exploring those things is really helpful, because the insecurities will still be there and you'll have to crash from that superiority sort of thing eventually. And that's very painful, um, because you'll see that it, because we all have to see that those things aren't true. Um, the healing process. So someone said, um, well, what are your strategies for managing ADD? I'm, I'm not going to discuss a lot of how I manage these things, because, like I said, a lot of the symptoms disappeared in the healing process and don't require any kind of management. Um, but of course, I think it's about tuning into who we are. And and like so much is the comparisons that confuse us. Like we should do, like, oh, this person does it that way. And so really tuning into ourselves and seeing how we work and honoring that and being like understanding towards ourselves, like how my brain processes information and how I like to organize and things like that. Earlier on in my life, when I was really struggling, before I healed a lot of these beliefs and fears and things like that, if someone would have handed me some kind of like strategy for being more organized and keeping track, I would have been like, "Huh," it would have done nothing for me, because my ability to manage or make decisions that work for me and how I process things and how I work, it's an outcome and a side effect of the healing process. It wasn't the healing itself. So that awareness opens up. For example, if there was a belief that I'm not good enough or I'm stupid, transforming that was like, oh my God, that's not true. I'm an intelligent being. And then what happens is it opens up the aperture, and then we can see options that we couldn't see because that belief was covering us, holding us sort of in a small space where we couldn't see all these options. And then we feel like a victim of something. We feel like a victim of the world or a victim of our mind. And even though I talk about the illusion and these things, it's really about seeing it for what it is so we can go further, so we don't have to feel like a victim of it or suffer unnecessarily. Um, yeah, so yeah, the biggest differences I that happened for me wasn't in um, managing things. Now, someone asked, "What have you tried? Like, what are all the things you tried?" I tried so many things, especially during the years I was taking the medication, because one of the questions was, "Why do I need medication and another person doesn't? Like, what's different?" And I was told, "Oh, it's like your physiology; you can't change it." But yeah, I explored diets. I explored all kinds of alternative healing and like alternative doctors. And honestly, it didn't really amount to much. I know some people are sensitive to food and different things in foods and diets and things like that. So definitely whatever's empowering for you to make changes, that makes you feel better is great. I'm all for it. For me, none of those things really made a huge difference. I think being healthy is good, but eating a healthy diet, of course, but beyond the basics of that, none of the diets and the remedies really made a difference, because they didn't reach to my unconscious where the problems were being stored, where the beliefs were being stored. And I know, like, it can be difficult to hear about beliefs when you're struggling with a symptom that's very big for you. Like, I know I would hear things and think, wait, what are you saying? Like, are you telling me it's my imagination? It's very real. And it is very real. And that's how powerful those beliefs are. It's that they can create symptoms, and very real symptoms. They can make our mind, they can change our chemistry, of course. So but that means that also that power is still within us when to transform those things and to create something different for ourselves. So that same power comes in with our awareness that, we can bring ourselves into a creative, fulfilling life, and we don't have to suffer, and we don't have to be a victim of other people's beliefs or the world's ideas, and we can start to live life from our own awareness and our own intelligence and our own intuition. And if you're a parent trying to help your child that's struggling, I would say definitely work on your own self trust, your instincts, your intuition, so that you can help your child learn to trust theirs. And then you can almost like learn together, because I don't think a parent can ever have all the answers for their child, but you can help them explore themselves first by exploring yourself. And then you can, sometimes the child can teach you things, and then sometimes you can teach the child things and explore together. Um, yeah. So, yeah, and then as far as things I've tried, one of the reasons I wanted to learn how to focus is because I felt like if I can focus, I can create what I want. It's like I can create my reality. Because I had this thing is the mind is very powerful. So if my mind isn't working, then I'm just kind of screwed. But actually, a lot of that was I was conditioned to place a lot of importance on the intellectual mind, the thinking kind of aspect of our mind. And yeah, it's true, we create our own reality, but a lot of that is happening unconsciously. And the mind cannot take us to the unconscious. The mind only goes on what it knows, what we already know. So when I would read about affirmations, I would try affirmations, and that really didn't feel good and it didn't work because it's like repeating something that I don't believe in. It was sort of the opposite of where I needed to go, which was authenticity and connecting and trusting myself, even when I'm feeling something negative, to trust that and explore that as a healing process instead of like, oh no, I love myself, I'm smart, I'm perfect, whatever, repeating those things. Because what that does is, oops, it got a little, um, what that does is it just further suppresses those things that are just asking for healing and recognition. And so the process I use that helped me the most is the Dalian Method, which if you've been following me or if you've seen my website, you know that that's the main process that I use in my workshops, in my healing sessions that I facilitate for others. And I still continue to use it for myself because the power of the Dalian Method is that it helps us access to what we don't see happening so that we can see it. It accesses that intelligence beyond our mind. Then we can discover those beliefs for ourselves, the stories that are happening inside that we're not even aware of, the traumas that need to be healed. And it takes you through the process to heal them, discover them, awaken them out of the unconscious, bring them out of the dark into the light, release the emotions, feel the emotions, honor them, release them, transform them, and then direct to what is the truth. So often I've seen, like, for example, if it was a belief about my intelligence, it's like, wow, that's not true. And it wasn't an affirmation trying to convince myself, like, it was, I see it, I experience it, I feel it in my body that this is not the truth. And then I see what the truth is, whatever I need to see in that moment. And then that strengthens our intuition. It strengthens our ability to navigate and access other dimensions because it expands our consciousness. So it expands what we can experience while being able to stay rooted inside of ourselves. Like, because life is so much more fun when you don't feel like you have to protect yourself from all these experiences. Instead, you can go and explore things, learn from them. You don't have to hide from so many things. At least that's what it was for me. It's like, wow, my whole world opened up. Um, yeah, so the main tool is the Dalian Method. Um, but I would say anything that helps you feel and honor what you feel, explore yourself without a rigid sort of dogma of right, wrong, anything that helps you address and come out of your self judgments, your creativity, use of your imagination. I've done lots of things that just helped me to be really free. And like, I love to paint, but it's not painting pretty, beautiful pictures that you can hang in a museum. It's just like expressing that energy of creativity and that freedom. A lot of it's like if you watch a child play, they don't have this pressure of meeting an outcome. They're just in the process of playing. So that has helped me because then things open up. Because when we're relaxed and we're free, then things can really flow. That's just what worked for me the most. Um, Anything that's like rigid or like very sort of like the system is very much like we've got to diagnose you and like you've got to take tests and that if it's not feeling right for you, then let yourself question it. Let yourself ask questions. And anyone that is trying to help and cares about you, they won't mind if you ask sincere questions. Some of these, like I know when I was doing research, like some people would just not like questions. Like it's permanent. Stop asking questions. It's like, wait a minute. Like I could feel like, what's the agenda here? Like, why am I being told these things and shut down? So yeah. So I think that's about it. I might make a third video if more comes to me about what to share about this, but that's all I can think of to share right now. Um, well, actually, there's one more question I didn't. Someone asked, what would be the number one thing you wish you knew then that you know now? That my experience is meaningful, my inner world is meaningful, and um, to not deny my any aspect of my inner world and myself. That's that's what I would have told myself, um, because that was the root of a lot of my suffering. Um, and I did that because I wanted to fit in. I was afraid to be different. And it's about working through a lot of layers of fears over many lifetimes. So I wouldn't say that it's completely nailed down and healed. It's an ongoing process, but I definitely, that's what I wish I would have known then. With that said, I don't feel like my life has been a mistake. I don't think like I would do it differently because I don't need to live through all that suffering again. But I needed to experience what I needed to experience so I could learn, so I could really understand these things. Um, because I don't think we truly know things just because we're being told them. We know them through experiencing those things and knowing them from within. So I feel that everything has unfolded exactly the way I needed them to in order to get to this point. Um, So yeah, I'll make a third video if I think of other things to say, or maybe I won't. If you have questions or things you want me to cover, or you want to give me feedback, I totally welcome that and would really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to this. I appreciate that.